hundreds of thousands of workers replaced by machines. A report from the Portland Business Alliance finds nearly half of all jobs in the Portland metro are at risk of automation. The outlook is even worse in rural parts of the state. Automation is already happening at big Oregon businesses like Intel. But the Portland Business Alliance says Oregonians should prepare for, not resist, the coming revolution. Joining us today to talk about the future of Oregon's workforce, the President and CEO of the Portland Business Alliance, Sandra McDonough, and the President of economic consulting firm ECONorthwest, John Tapogna. From KGW News, this is Straight Talk.
And good evening to you. Welcome to Straight Talk. I'm Chris Willis, filling in this week for Laurel Porter. It sounds like something out of science fiction, if you heard that open. The robot revolution. But technological advancements could make many current jobs obsolete far sooner than many people realize. Thousands of jobs in Oregon could be taken over by automation in just the next few decades. The Portland Business Alliance released a report last week that found more than 144,000 jobs are at risk in Oregon alone. So what jobs will survive automation? What does the future of Oregon's economy look like? And what can we do now to prepare for the coming wave of automation? Joining us now to talk about that and more, Sandra McDonough, President and CEO of the Portland Business Alliance, and John Tapogna, President of ECONorthwest, an economic consulting firm. Thanks so much to both of you for being with us. Let's get right to it. Let's talk about this report and tell us some of the big takeaways for business here.
Well, what we looked at is sort of the maximum case scenario. If you apply what we know about jobs and industry sectors that might be automated, we applied that to Oregon to see what the impact is. And we saw that as many as half the jobs in the Portland metro area could be at risk. But in rural areas, especially along the coast, it could be even greater than that.
Why choose automation for this report? How did that specific topic come up?
Well, it's a hot topic around the world, and we just have so many different forms of automation coming at us. In the past, it used to be robots in car factories, but now we've got increased robotics. We have artificial intelligence, we have drones, so it's coming at many different dimensions, and it's accelerating. And
John, we had talked before we started here that we're kind of in the middle of this right now, right? This is something we can't ignore.
Yeah, economists would say, if you look back over the last several decades, and you could look particularly at prime age male working, so 25 to 54-year-old males, we had about 5% of them out of work back in the 60s. We've got about 15% of them out of work today, and that's headed to potentially a quarter by 2050. Or a third. That would be a huge problem.
Worse or better demographically? I heard you, Sandra, talk about the rural parts of Oregon. Is this going to be worse there, or what will the difference be?
Potentially has a bigger impact in rural Oregon because there are more jobs there that are potentially subject to automation. Here in the Portland metro area, we have more engineers, more innovators that machines can't really replace entirely.
So let's talk about Portland. What is the impact going to be, do you see, in the Portland metro area?
Well, as Sandy said, nobody's immune to the disruption. So there's an awful lot of jobs in transportation and in services and sales, et cetera, that lend themselves to automation here in the same way that they do elsewhere. But I would also say, in Portland's case, this is our home turf in terms of creating this automation. A lot of what is being forecast is being built on the backs of Intel processors. And Moore's Law and the increasing processing speed has aided and abetted a lot of this activity, and big data and artificial intelligence. So this is the place where we should be inventing a lot of this.
Right, and according to this report, what's the time frame we're talking about here?
It is, over the course of the next 2 to 3 decades is essentially what they're looking at. So these Oxford engineers came up with this method to look at the risk, and they were essentially looking at all of these occupations and saying, where do I see a bottleneck to computers? And if I don't see one, I'm going to call it at risk.
And when we're talking about that time frame, Sandra, you know as well as anybody, we're talking about population growth. We all see it and hear about people moving to the Pacific Northwest, people moving to Oregon. How is this going to play as far as into to our population growth?
Well, we're a major attractor of talent, so we have to make sure that we continue to maintain the qualities in this area that are causing people to move here. So that means we have to have affordable housing, available housing. We have to have jobs for people to come to, and we have to embrace this change and figure out how we grow from it. For, as John said, a lot of the innovation is going on here. There's huge talk about autonomous vehicles. One of the major innovators in that area is Daimler, right across the river here in Portland, and they're doing a lot of work, which means job creation there.
Yeah. You talked about some of the rural areas, and let's talk quickly about education and how that plays into it. Reports this week, and this is off the top of my head, I believe Oregon again, graduation rate's third worst in the country. Education has got to play a huge role in this automation forecast.
Absolutely. We've been saying for a long time that to be ready to embrace the future as a state, we have to have an educated workforce, particularly in science, technology, engineering, and math, but just broadly, people who are ready to embrace education and have the skills to be in the workforce. So we really have to double down on that.
Well, should people, parents, educators, and the state, I don't want to say wake up, but should everybody sit up and take notice of this for our education leaders? We got to act now.
Absolutely. We've adopted the 40-40-20 goals in the state. 40% graduate from 4-year college, 40% have a 2-year, some sort of a certificate, and 20% have a high school education. That assumes 100% high school education, and we're clearly not there. We haven't made much progress on that goal. We've really got to double down and make it happen.
I didn't want to beat that issue, but we've, years and years and years.
Right.
I mean, again, this year we're third worst in the country.
Right.
It seems very consistent. We've talked about science, technology, engineering, math, the kids learning and the emphasis on STEM. Does that need to change in some way, John?
Yeah, well, I'm gonna go back to the 40-40-20 goal, because that sometimes comes under attack as being too ambitious.
Sure.
But let's go back to the first big wave of automation that this country lived through as we're moving off of farms and into factories.
Yeah.
We survived that by inventing high schools. We didn't have high schools in the early 20th century, and we had them in the Midwest led because they were the farming part of the country. And so 40-40-20 seems ambitious, but it is no more ambitious than having created the entire high school system to begin with. And so we need an equally robust response. With respect to what do we teach? Yes, STEM continues to be important, but economists have also looked at what has the labor market been demanding over the course of the last 3 decades already. And again, we're in the middle of this. The people who have combined social skills with math skills, they make off like bandits in the labor market. If you have problem solving, negotiation skills, persuasion skills, communication skills, and math skills, jobs are growing. If you had to get rid of one of those, get rid of your math skills. Sure. Because the job market is essentially saying...
And I never thought we'd be just discussing that, not to interrupt, but get rid of the math skills as the least important of those.
If you're measuring social skills against math skills, social skills are so important.
Yeah. And math skills are... But it is essentially what the job market is already telling us and has been for the last couple of decades, is humans increasingly need to figure out what they can do that computers can't.
Yeah.
Because computers are going to be programmed to do just about everything else.
And with the significance of the business community here, are there things Portland needs to do? Does the business community need to influence a little bit of change in that direction, or even on a broader sense, the state of Oregon?
Well, the worst thing the state or any government jurisdiction could do is say, whoa, let's try to stop this wave, because it's going to come at us. So we have to figure out how we build on it. We take the skills that we have, we build on it, we build jobs around that. It's what has happened in the past is when technology has advanced certain occupations, the new ones are created around those. So we have to figure out what directions it's going to take and think ahead and be a winner ahead of the game in the rest of the country.
You mentioned the tech industry. There's such a tech influence here. Is there a risk from this report that we're looking at a bubble burst in the tech industry?
Well, not in the long term, because this is going to continue to march on, and Oregon is so well positioned in so many different ways. So you've got OHSU working on precision medicine to beat cancer. You've got the University of Oregon with the new Phil and Penny Knight Center for Advancing Science. You've got Oregon State, which has some of the leading robotics programs in the country. You've got cross-laminated timber and drones out in the gorge. So it's multidimensional, to the point that we've talked about earlier. It's going to take more and more talent and thick talent markets to deploy this stuff. And in terms of public policy, it's going to take more housing.
Right.
As leaders in these fields, is this something you saw coming, to go off a little bit from the study and just, on a personal perspective? Did you see this coming, this automation?
Well, I think we've been living it.
Yeah.
If you go to the grocery store and you check yourself out now,
that's
you go to a restaurant and you can order from a screen on your table instead of waiting for a waiter or waitress to come to you. Self-driving cars, there's a lot that we've already seen, and I think what we need to understand is where the biggest vulnerabilities on the human side are, and they tend to be in lower wage jobs that are easily automated, and that's something we need to be thinking about, how we build a support system for people in those jobs now so that they're ready for the new jobs of the future.
And along those lines, you mentioned ordering at your table and checking yourself out. 2 things I've done in the last 24 hours. Is the danger here ignoring those things and not being aware of, hey, here it comes? Because, when I'm checking myself out at the grocery store, I don't think, well, look at the automation that I'm now doing that is
right.
We just kind of are asleep at this. Is there a danger in not acknowledging, recognizing, and addressing this?
Oh, unequivocally.
Yeah.
Because the world is going to move on, and some are going to lean into this problem,
right.
and they'll continue to advance and innovate, and Oregon will get left behind.
Yeah.
So we absolutely need to take a positive approach to this. We have to recognize all the challenges and disruptions, anticipate the disruptions, and build public policies to work around them.
Yeah, that's a monumental task. Let's talk about some of the positive sides to this. There are positive sides to automation. What's your takeaway, John, from some of the positive aspects of this?
Well, there's no question that technology sometimes is characterized as the boogeyman.
Yeah.
It appears scary and frightening, and if you see some of the presentations, they are unsettling.
Yeah.
But technology over the course of the last century is what delivered us from houses that were dark and unlit without plumbing to the living standard that we have today and the high GDP per capita that we have today. So it has by far and away been a positive force across American history, and it should continue to be a positive force across American history. And what we need to do is harness and focus on those aspects of technology that can bring us higher living standards and better, longer lives.
We talk about income inequality too. We see it all the time. Is this something that can increase the income inequality?
Well, again, we're very concerned about the low end of the income range and the impact on those jobs, some of which are kind of primed to be automated. So we really need to be thinking about how we leverage people into different opportunities, starting with education and giving them support as they move from that.
I was going to say, not to go back to education, but a lot of these jobs that will be replaced by automation are from the folks who are not graduating from high school, from some of the. So again, education has got to be central.
Education, and we've also talked about our social safety nets in this report. And I think it's the first time we've written a report where we really call out a need to re-examine social safety nets, that place where people who run into an issue can land and be financially secure. So most of what we have was created a long time ago, before the Depression. So we have to look at how those work to make sure we're ready for some impacts in this that will be difficult for a lot of people.
Not to have you guys solve everybody's problem, but are there solutions to this that stand out to you? That just, okay, this is one thing we've got to take care of. I mean, I don't want you to, solve the problem in a half an hour show, but are there solutions that you just say, yes, this has got to be addressed, this has got to be addressed?
Yeah, I mean, a couple that come to mind. One is getting people through on clear pathways in the community college system. We have a community college system that was largely set up around access. We wanted to get people into the door with some kind of access to credit, et cetera, but not really with clear pathways to completion. So there's an awful lot of work being done here in Oregon and across the nation about making that community college experience much more productive. It doesn't have to be a full two-year plus associate's degree to have economic value, But you do have to have discrete learning opportunities that the job market recognizes that boosts a skill that can be compensated for by an employer. And so the clearer we get there, the more efficient that system becomes and the more valuable it becomes for the students. That's one. A second one's very clear, is that we are always going to have what's relatively low paid work now that does not lend itself to automation. Personal care and social work and cleaning and
lots
and
of
the
them.
like. There's a lot of jobs, and we're going to have to think about how to make that work pay well enough so that people can survive. Sandy worked on the minimum wage a couple of sessions ago. That one, Oregon has already sort of taken a step out and is about as far as economists have ever seen.
Right.
So we're out on the ledge on the minimum wage. Going forward, you're probably talking more about tax subsidies that could boost wages and like the earned income tax credit. Seeing much bigger expansions of that, both at the federal level and at the state level.
Huge things to consider.
And there'll be work that's created as a result of implementing automation. We talk a lot about driverless cars, autonomous vehicles. First of all, an autonomous truck doesn't mean a driverless truck. I think you're still going to see people in the cabs. But what kind of sensors need to go on the highways? How do we need to prepare for that? So if we're thinking ahead about how this all gets implemented, there will be jobs created through that work that we need to be thinking about people who are impacted in other ways to make sure they have pathways to those jobs.
That's a whole interesting topic on job creation to automation as well.
Right.
You talked about social safety nets. I want to talk more about that after a quick break. We're going to take a break and we'll touch on that and a lot more with John and Sandra when we come back. Stay with us.